I want to welcome you to this Norwegian podcast, and I'm extremely pleased to have you as a guest. And the reason for that is that I read your book last year, and it was a real page turner.
Thank you.
And when I was reading the book, Jack, I must admit, I was thinking a lot of times what happened to his upbringing and how did he become this master spy, because you were living two different lives, and how was that possible?
Well, this is one thing that I've been trying to explain to myself, and the explanation is fundamentally incomplete because I think I need some kind of a brain scientist to figure out how this thing works. You know, I'm not necessarily responsible for every one of my characteristics. It's something that has to do with genetics, what you were born with, and then and the other piece that I can retrace is the upbringing, the impressions and the influences I got in early childhood. They're very important, which, you know, I figured this out over time, but I can't give you a conclusive answer. I'm telling you one thing. Since, you know, actually for a long time since I stopped spying, I didn't even think about all of that stuff. But then in preparation for writing the book, and then I got interviewed a lot, I did a lot of research, and I found two interviews that were given by, one of them was the ex-head of the KGB, and another one was the ex-person in command of illegals. And out of these two interviews, I pieced together the character traits that they were looking for. I came up with about a dozen, and surprise, surprise, I fit that profile. Now, see, when I was recruited, I didn't get a sense, you know, I wasn't stupid. You know, I was a pretty well-trained scientist, but I didn't have a clue that these informal interactions I had with the guy who I was working with informally was fundamentally looking for all this stuff. So in some sense, I think I got to give him more credit for what I thought was just pretty much unfocused kind of training and development. But in some areas, they got the right person, that's for sure.
What was the trait they were looking for, do you think?
If I can cite some from memory, some of them are pretty obvious. They were looking for bright people who have who are very adaptable, can adapt to change very quickly, make decisions on a dime, and language abilities, pretty much emotional stability, which is always one of those things. You know, you can be emotionally stable, but something can really change the equilibrium that you have. But my favorite was and is a well-controlled inclination to adventure. Now think about this. Inclination to adventure, yeah, because it was adventurous, and I was looking forward to live an adventurous life. But it had to be well controlled, and therein lies the problem. Because how do you know how well controlled my inclination to adventure was? Occasionally, I stepped over the line, and I took risks that I shouldn't have taken. And eventually, when I was completely out of control, when I told the Soviets that I'm done, right? So, but fundamentally, again, you know, and I give a lot of presentations and speeches in the U.S. these days, and every time I come to that point, I'm marveling how well they actually found the pattern that they were looking for in me. Period.
How was the recruitment process?
As I indicated already, it was quite informal at the beginning. It was a very slow getting to know each other.
Did you start with a lunch with a colleague, or how was it?
No, the initial contact was a total stranger, and he was a German national. You know, he approached me one Saturday as I was sitting in my dorm room, and there was nobody else there. And he came in, and he had a cover story that was fundamentally unbelievable. I mean, this was so stupid that within the first 10 seconds, I knew that he was not who he claimed to be. He said, I'm from, there was a local, internationally known factory of optics called Zeiss Jena. And he said, I'm from that company and I want to talk with you about your plans for the future after you graduate. Well, that was so unreal because that just didn't happen in those days in East Germany. You finished your studies and then you were assigned someplace. If you were near the top of the class, you may have had some choices, but nobody did any recruiting. So I already knew something was up with this guy. My initial guess that he was East German intelligence, the Stasi. And that turned out to be wrong because after some back and forth, this is one of those interactions that I will remember as long as I have the ability to do so. But he asked this question, he changed his tune. He said, I'm really from the government. And then he said, could you imagine to work yourself for the government one of those days? And I already had a feeling, well, government, of course, it's Secret Service or something. And I said, sure, but not as a chemist. So we were communicating sort of between the lines. He had his answer. He knew that I would be somebody they might want to work with. And then the second time we met, he introduced me to a fellow with a Russian accent. And he said, oh, by the way, we're working with our Soviet friends. And at the end of that was at a restaurant. At the end of that dinner, he excused himself. He was gone out of my life forever. And that's when I realized I had a relationship with the KGB. That's how, and that relationship was an informal one for about a year and a half. I met with this fellow maybe once a week, once every other week. We talked about life, about everything. I just shared everything freely with this fellow, and he occasionally gave me some stuff to read that was illegal in East Germany, like West German publications. And we talked a bit about what it became pretty clear that they wanted me to go to another country. Initially, I thought it was West Germany, as an undercover spy. And we talked about what that might be and how you would operate. He gave me a few tasks and some reports to write just to sort of profile me. Now, in those days, I was totally innocent. I was very curious. I wanted to find out, so what's going on? And, this is interesting. I had not made up my mind that I wanted to do this, but I just wanted to hear more about it. In the meantime, what I didn't know, but I guarantee you that that's what happened. After every meeting, he would go to his office and write a report. The fellow who saw my files in the KGB archives, who is responsible for me even sitting here talking to you because he defected and smuggled a whole lot of information. He took that with him. His name is Vasily Mitrokin. He's passed away since. He indicated to British intelligence, which then trickled down to the FBI, that there were 7 thick folders that had my name on it, my cover name. So that means every time I had any interaction with anybody from that service, somebody wrote a report. Is that amazing or what? Most of it was nonsensical. Probably my finance reports were in there as well.
Did you identify yourself as a nationalist at that time?
No. Even very early on, I considered myself, and this is sort of an arrogant type of statement, particularly for somebody who was confined to East Germany and the Eastern nations, but I considered myself a citizen of the world. Mm-hmm. I had an affinity towards other cultures. Particularly, I liked France a lot. For one reason only, I read a lot of novels written by famous French novelists, particularly Honoré de Balzac and Émile Zola. And so and one of the reasons I I eventually signed up to do this kind of work. It was that the ability to travel and go to Paris. And lo and behold, one day I wound up in Paris. I just want to complete the answer to the last question. So the recruitment process, it was very informal for about 18 months. And then sort of overnight, as if you flip a switch, it became quite formal. I was sent on a practice trip to East Berlin. I met an agent there with whom I had contact for about 3 weeks. And at the end of the 3 weeks, I was taken to KGB headquarters in Berlin. And I met this, this very senior guy. You never knew their real names and what they actually did. But based on the interaction with the other folks, I knew that he was senior. And after about 15 minutes of small talk, he point blank asked me, "So are you in or not?" That came, I was totally unprepared. I was still, trying to figure out. You push that can down the road. I had what I considered a good life in East Germany. I was already an employee of the university. I taught some math and some chemistry, and I had an excellent career path. I really liked where I lived, a little town of Jena.
And you had a family at that time?
Family didn't play much of a role. I had moved out of my mother's home. My parents were divorced. I had moved out of my mother's home when I was 18, and I lived pretty much, even though it was dorms, but I was pretty much self-sufficient. My family fundamentally was my basketball team. I just loved the game of basketball. You practice twice a week, and then you go on trips on a weekend, and it was a lot of camaraderie. I actually skipped some things at university because there was a basketball game to go to. So family was not it, but my career and the basketball was what really was very important to me. So when the guy asked me, "Are you in or not?" and I gave him this kind of an answer, I said, "Well, I'm not really trained yet, am I? I can't." He said, "Don't worry about it, but I want an answer by tomorrow."
Wow.
Yep. And this was black and white. If I had said no, they would have let me go. Right? You don't force somebody into that kind of an adventure. You just don't. It would never work. So I said yes. Well, from the moment on, I said yes. There was no more turning back either. So this was one of the pivotal points in my life. There were a couple of others, but this was the one that fundamentally, it's like when you come to a fork in the road, you go this way or you go that way. Either way, it's a one-way street. You can't turn back.
I see you as a very intelligent person. Very ever afraid for saying yes because you saw this as excitement. Did you ever regret it or have?
No. And this is one of the odd things that I would like for somebody to look into my brain and see where that comes from. And I didn't even know this until much later when some friend of mine here in the United States with whom I worked a lot, who had no idea about my background, I was still totally secret to the rest of the world. One time he took me aside and said to me, "You know what your biggest strength is?" And I says, "I don't have a clue." He said, "You have no fear."
Ooh.
And I still did not realize what he was talking about because I have fears like everybody else. The one I feel the most is right now is not in the house, is my wife. And I'm only partially kidding. I had some bosses who I feared, but not enough to not tell them the truth as I knew it. And I was completely 100% fearless. I was not afraid to go to jail. I'm not bragging. It is what it is. I have, when it comes to physical courage, I'm not as fearless. I don't like pain like most people. But mentally, no, there's nothing. There is something missing. There's a gene missing that says, "Listen, if you want to survive, don't do that."
But do I remember the book correctly? Because in my mind, I was thinking that you had a wife in Germany before you left to the US. Is this wrong here?
Yeah. Well, it was a little more complicated than that. I had a girlfriend who I was in love with, but she never knew, while she was my girlfriend, she never knew what I was doing in Berlin. I was already being trained. And then it turned out that it turned out that I had a talent to acquire English really well. So instead of sending me to West Germany, they moved me to Moscow to study English. And that's where I perfected my English capabilities. And at that point, I broke up with the lady. There was no room in my life for her, even though it was hard for me to do. But, I was so focused on, doing what I had set out to do. And then after 2 years, I come back to Berlin for a little while, and out of the blue, quite by accident, she shows up again. Now, look at the psychology. He's a young man in his mid-20s, late 20s, who spent 2 years pretty much in isolation in a country where he barely speaks the language, has interaction only with a few spies and a couple of old people who teach him English. And he comes back, and this pretty lovely young lady shows up, and the first thing she asks, "Do you still love me?" There's only one answer to that one. So at that point, I was now a well-trained agent, and I felt that my boss in Berlin had a significantly more appreciation for me. And so I was courageous enough and asked him. So I told him, about this girl. He said, "Do you think I could have a relationship with her?" And they actually agreed to it. So I got agreement to get married to her. So she, at that point, then knew who I was and what was going to happen, that I was going to leave her for a number of years. And her rationale was, this is what she told me: "I tried other men. They're all no good. It's either you or nobody." And that's how she rationalizes. Now, you can't rationalize like that 10, 15, 20 years ahead, because your attitudes change, right? But that's where we were at the time. And I was optimistic. I said, well, within about 10 years, we're still young, I'm coming back, and then we live happily ever after. Right.
So how did the story go?
Well, which story?
I presume you left Germany at some point.
Yeah, I left Germany. I wound up in the United States in 1978. And within one day of my arrival, I destroyed the false passport that I had used to travel there and pulled out a birth certificate that was a genuine copy of a birth certificate under the name of Jack Barsky, and pretended to be an American. And then I moved that was Chicago. I moved to New York and acquired the proper documentation this was all, nothing forged. It was genuine stuff. The documentation that you need to live as a normal citizen and work. So particularly the two key documents were a driver's license, which is like an ID card in the United States. If you have a driver's license, it's acknowledged as an ID everywhere in the country, and a social security card. Nobody would employ you without a social security number. And so within a year, it took me quite a while to get this done. Within a year, I was able to actually find employment, and my first job. And this is always is mind-boggling when people hear that. I was an assistant professor in Germany, and I was an academic star. But my first job in the U.S. was as a bike messenger in Manhattan. I was riding a bicycle all day, delivering packages, getting insulted by dim-witted secretaries.
To be honest, how was that, Jack?
They talked down to the stupid messengers because most of messengers were not very bright.
So how was that feeling?
Not bad. You see, this is one other thing that made me a really good candidate for this kind of job. I learned from childhood on, and that has something to do with training, to defer gratification, to do what it takes, to be disciplined. I just did that because I knew, there would be better things coming down the road. I had to do it. I had to get through with it. And, there was some aspect of that bike messenger job that were actually a lot of fun when it didn't rain or snow and it wasn't too hot, and you can zoom down Fifth Avenue much faster than the cars. It was this sense of freedom. There's a bit of a mystique about bike messengers. Movies have been made and so forth. There's something to that. It was fun, and I tell you what, I had the best figure of my entire life. I was down to 155 pounds, nothing but muscle, not an ounce of fat on me. And I still, when I got home, I did stuff because at the time I couldn't interact with a lot of bright people. I was still not secure in my American personality. I was culturally still not trained enough to fool bright, inquisitive people. So I kept to myself a lot, but I did reading. And at one point, I started learning Spanish, and I self-taught Spanish, and I got pretty good at it. So somehow, I don't know. I didn't feel miserable. I didn't feel lonely. I didn't feel like, oh, what am I doing here? It was all good.
But who was Jack Barsky? And was he the same? Yeah, let's take that first.
Yeah, he was a young man who was born in 1944, and his parents were Elisha Lee Barsky and Beatrice, and with a maiden name of Schwartz. That's a Jewish couple, and Elisha Lee was, I found out later, he was Orthodox Jew. And unfortunately, the young man died at the age of 11. He had some very, very dangerous pneumonia, which he did not survive. And so they found some Soviet agent found his name on a gravestone in a cemetery near Washington, D.C. And I found this out later. The KGB wouldn't tell me that. They just gave me the birth certificate. He pretended to be the father of the deceased child, applied for a death certificate, and somehow using that death certificate, he was able to get a birth certificate. Not very good security in the United States in those days. And quite frankly, in different ways and in different forms, we still don't have very good security. Now, nowadays, you can't get a social security card anymore at the age of 33, because if you're born here, you get one automatically. But there's all kinds of ways to sneak into this country and do damage. It's just a little different, and I guarantee to you, foreign intelligence services know how to do this.
One thing I've always been curious about, I want to ask a person when I was talking to a spy, that was, when you're taking an identity, will the new identity be the same as the real you, as a person? How you act, how you think, how you behave around other people. Are you the same as the real you when you take an identity, like Jack Barsky?
Yeah, see, this is, I think, where there wasn't enough training, but I sort of got away with it. I think the Russians didn't really understand that Americans and Germans, to them, they sort of look very similar, but we're not. There's some German behavioral traits that I found out much, much later that I never shed. That if the right person, or the wrong person for that matter, had been in touch with me, he would have said, man, this guy, he doesn't feel right. Particularly the Germans are very aggressive in their communication. And there's some nonverbal communication. For instance, when they have a discussion with you and they get intense, they come much closer face to face than Americans will. And they are extremely radically negative when they think something is wrong. And Americans, they're a little more soft, and I was not aware of it. So I pretty much transported my German self and overlaid the language with the English, with the American English, and then learned a lot of history about what it would have been like to have been grown up in the United States. So I faked it reasonably well, but it's not like an actor who steps into a different persona. I did not. Now, over time, I've lived here now for 40 years. I'm not the same German anymore that I used to be. I'm not as direct. I'm not as critical. I'm not as in your face. And quite frankly, I'm not as disciplined anymore.
But you're very good at connecting. I've been interviewing a lot of people for the last 2 years, and when I'm talking to you, I see and I hear that you're very good at connecting with other people. Is that a trait you always had?
It's a trait that I probably always had when I didn't quite know that I had it. In that spectrum, on the far left is an introvert and on the far right is an extrovert. I'm sort of in the middle. I feel uncomfortable in certain social settings, but if I have a good reason to be at a place, I connect very easily with people, such as workplace or where you study, or sports, not at a cocktail party. But you figure this out really well. I make nowadays, and particularly since I now live in the state of Georgia, where the people are much friendlier, I've become very outgoing. What I think I've always done and always had the ability is to figure out who the other person is and talk to them in their language. I'll give you a couple of examples. I had a pretty decent career in corporate America. So I learned to speak numbers with the chief financial officer, and I learned to speak feelings and exaggerations and what have you with the marketing people. So, I've always been pretty good at figuring out who are you. And even today, when I meet new people and they want to know about my life, I want to know about them. I don't want to talk about me anymore. So, unfortunately, this is not for me to ask you questions, but you're very astute. You figured this out pretty well. And I got to a point, and this is not bragging, but I got to a point, I have enough evidence thereof that it takes me about a maximum of 5 minutes of some kind of chat with another person to figure out roughly who they are.
So you're a good person reader. So, for how many years did you work as a spy in the U.S. after you became Jack Barsky?
It was, I arrived in October of 78, and I resigned in December of 88, so it was 10 years and 2 months.
How is it possible to resign as a spy for the KGB?
It fundamentally is not possible.
That was
I told him the second biggest lie that I've told in my life. This first biggest being impersonating an American, but the second biggest was they wanted me to return back. It was. I have evidence now. Third-party evidence that truly they believed there was something going on. They believed there must have been maybe a traitor, but they were worried that my cover was about to be blown. And they called me back in an emergency mode. And the reason that I didn't do what I was supposed to do was because I had this 18-month-old girl, my daughter, in the U.S., and I was still trying to figure out, how to support this girl because I really was in love with her. It was probably the first time that I had the feeling of unconditional love. You don't want anything back. You fall in love with a woman, but you want her to love you back. Your child, you love him no matter what. So I was afraid to go back to Russia and tell them, I got this child over there, can we support her? Because that would have unraveled a whole bunch of lies. I covered up a bunch of things that they didn't know, such as that I married her mother to make her legal, which is this complete insubordination. This is one of the risks I shouldn't have taken, right? But anyway, I needed to give you that bit of background. And so ultimately it came down to a point where I had to make a decision. I had either I go or I stay. And no matter how you rationalize this, going was 100% good for me. There was nothing personally that kept me here. I wasn't living the good life yet. There was the danger that the FBI was going to capture me, and if I tell the Russians I'm not coming, there was a possibility that they would come after me. So anyway, and the only thing that kept me here was this girl, and so and eventually, in that equation, there were like 5 heavy variables on the left and 1 variable on the right, and the right won. And eventually, I concocted that lie. I told him I'm not coming. I have HIV/AIDS, and I would like to seek treatment in this country. This worked. They told my German family, my German wife, that I had died from AIDS, and they also, and I have my son. We had a son together with whom I have a good relationship these days. My son told me that they actually did what I asked them to do, give her at least part of the money that I had saved up, that was dollars, that was kept on account in Moscow. And so I was able to, and I didn't know whether that was going to work at the time, but I was able to even take care of the Germans for a while. So that's how it worked. It was a long explanation, but that happens a lot with my life. You ask one question and I have to give you a long story to make understandable the situation I was in. And it was almost never really clear cut. It was always a bunch of complications.
That makes you a perfect guest. So how was the emotional cost of being a spy when you're having a son and a wife in Germany, and you're also having a daughter and wife in the US?
Well, that was the other thing, and I told you a little bit about character traits. I was able to pretty much put my emotions into a bottle, put a cork on them, and not think about them, not be bothered by them.
How do you do that, Jack?
I can't tell you. I can't tell you. There was I had even though I'm not saying I had no emotions. That's why I would like to have a really qualified psychologist talk to me one day. I was not emotionless. I was not a psychopath, but I just pushed these things away. The fundamentally is if I had owned the bad situation I had operated myself into, it would have been hard to live with myself. Now, long term, there was damage, and the damage I carried forward to some extent. I got to a point where I was in danger of becoming, of my drinking getting out of control. But that took a long time to develop, and it was not immediately at the time of decision. When I made the decision to stay, I just threw myself into the new task. And the new task was to make a life for this little girl, her mother. We had another child. We bought a house. So I think, as I'm talking to you, I think this is a realization that I just came to. I have always handled my emotions by throwing myself into work, into a new goal, and make that goal the primary reason for my existence. That makes you an incomplete human being.
And a perfect spy.
And a perfect spy. It also makes you, if you can't open yourself up to the emotional aspect of self, that makes you also not a pleasant person to deal with. So I'm hopefully that I'm not the same person anymore, but I'm still task oriented. I still have a list of things to do, and I'm very happy when the things to do list gets smaller. But if it's empty, I don't know, what am I doing here? I need to invent more work.
So you quit, and did the FBI just knock at your door when you quit, or what happened?
No, they didn't knock at the door, but as I indicated, there was this defector from who was an archivist at the KGB headquarters who took a lot of information to MI5 in Great Britain, and then some of that trickled out. And I think in 1995, the FBI heard that there was a sleeper agent by the name of Jack Barsky in the United States, someplace in the Northeast. Didn't take him very long to find me because there weren't too many Jack Barskys. There aren't too many. Now, there was a dilemma. All they knew, they didn't have a whole lot of knowledge. All they knew is that I was a KGB agent. KGB didn't exist anymore. And and another thing, that I was really well trained. You don't survive that as long as I did without having the training. So, and now the question was, is he still active? And if so, what does he do? Is he running some agents in our government? There were, at that time, there were two cases where they found two moles inside. One was in the FBI, the other was in the CIA. Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen, they did a lot of damage. They caused people to die, right? And so they very, very carefully investigated me, because they knew if they got too close, I would find out, assuming that I was still active. I wasn't. I had no clue that I was being investigated. It took them 3 years until eventually they decided, all right, we know that, we're pretty sure that this guy is not active anymore. Let's say hello and see if we can, cooperate with him. Let's see if we can get information out of him. And so when they introduced themselves, it was on a Friday after work, as I drove home from work, that there was a fake traffic stop. It was a state trooper in uniform who waved me over and asked me to step out of the car, and I still had no clue. And then another person showed up, and he showed me a badge, and he said, FBI, we would like to talk to you. That's when I remembered that at one point I had been a spy. It was not a good memory. That was, was one of this, as I said, I'm not very fearless, but it was one of the scariest moments in my life, because I figured everything will just crash in on me. And the primary reason that I stayed back in the U.S. would turn out to be a false reason, because the worst case scenario was I go to jail. My wife, who got her citizenship fraudulently, because she got it through me, she would be thrown out of the country, and my kids would become wardens of the state. And I'm a fast thinker, and all of this immediately came to my mind as, oh, shit. It turned out to be quite different, but I couldn't have known this right away. And they wouldn't have known it either. At that point, I had lost all allegiance to communism. The German Democratic Republic didn't exist anymore. I had pretty much adopted the American way of life. So the ideological reason and the patriotic reason for me to join the KGB had completely disappeared. I had no reason to not cooperate. I had every reason to cooperate with the FBI, which I did. And after like 6 weeks of detailed debriefing, they must have probably had created a thick book with all the information I gave them. There's more in their debriefing documents than is in my memoir. I had to then pass a lie detector test, which I did. And after that, the lead agent came to me and said, I got good news. Headquarters has decided that you can stay here. You will eventually, we'll help you get a green card. And if you care, you can become a citizen, which I did in 2014.
What do you think about today's society? Is it possible to live as a spy as you did? Now I think about social media, how hard it is to... everybody can search everything.
It's different and it is the same. There's... I could probably write at least a 20-page essay on this thing. So I got to be really focused on how I answer this. Number one, the methods of operation in many respects have not changed from the way we operated. With one major exception, communication is a whole lot more sophisticated. We're not talking about email. We're talking about microbursts. We're talking about sending tons of information to the other side with a thumb drive. I had to use regular photographs. And I got my information through Morse code. That doesn't mean Morse code isn't used anymore. If you scan the short waves and you hear a lot of dee 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 dee. What is that? Somebody's telling somebody else something, and it could be encrypted or it could be just open. Who knows? The world. In many respects, it's easier to spy these days than it used to be. The world has become much more open. There's a whole lot more commerce. The hard dividing line that was called the Iron Curtain is gone. And so you can, Russians can study over here or Chinese, and then they can you can get a green card because they're, valued by companies. They can even become citizens, but still be loyal to the old country. You don't know. So what I call the insider threat is probably bigger now than it used to be. What I did is fundamentally not possible anymore. As I said, you can't pretend to have been an American and say, I don't have a social security card. That doesn't exist anymore. You're born here, you get a social security number. But there's many, many ways to penetrate what is a very ineffective defense. Okay, and the second part of my answer, since I also have a pretty good grounding in information technology, I spent almost 40 years in that profession. Obviously, there's quite a bit of stealing of information and hacking going on. It's dangerous, but it's not the only way to spy. And here's the point I'm making. It's as long as human people make decisions, as humans make decisions, it will always be more important than anything else to find out what decision makers, such as the president or key people of any kind of government, are thinking, what's in their head. The brains cannot be hacked. but you can do a lot of damage through hacking. You can steal, you can create misinformation. The KGB used to be really good at creating misinformation through the printed press. I think the Russians are doing a decent job creating garbage information here, but this society doesn't even need help by the Russians. Every day, and I don't watch television anymore, but I look at the internet, I get my news from there, and I marvel at the stupidities that are being put out there by serious journalists, by politicians, and everybody says whatever argument they can use to promote their own self-interest. It is mind-boggling, and quite frankly, not to put a plug in there, but if I want to get some impartial information about what's going on in the world, it has to be in English because that's what I understand. I go to the BBC. There's no American news outlet that I can trust anymore. It's all about internal politics, and the world has become such a. We lost the focus on the external enemy. It used to be, okay, the communists are bad, and on the other side, from the communist angle, the capitalists are bad. So we all get along internally. Case in point, after 9/11, when the World Trade Center came down, for about several weeks, there were nothing but patriotic Americans. And then we forgot that there are enemies to our world of life, and that includes the Norwegian way of life. And I don't know what it is like in your country, but in this country, we're so fractionalized, and we're so negative, and we're so uncivil, and we constantly are at war with other people with whom we have more in common than the folks that truly mean us ill. So that was my soapbox speech about modern day society. And we are very vulnerable to outside interference, very vulnerable.
What do you think about AI and big data when it comes to security and security threats in the future?
Oh, boy. AI, for the longest time, and I told you I was in information technology, when they first came out 20 years ago with the term AI, I said, well, yeah, this is a bunch of nonsense. This was not, it was artificial, it was fast computer processing, but it was not intelligent. This has changed to some degree. The AI entities, whether that you call them robots or computers or whatever, they don't have a soul, but they are learning. And they get to a point where they are significantly better at making decisions in certain circumstances. I don't know. Honestly, that's a scary thing. And this is where you almost have to go back to some very visionary science fiction writers, like you may be familiar with Isaac Asimov, who wrote about this kind of stuff, about robots and people living in the same society where you cannot distinguish the robot from the person. We're not there yet, but that may come one day.
You're very close.
And he came up with the 3 laws of robotics. And I forgot what the 3, but the first one would be that a robot is to be programmed in such a way that he must not do harm to a human. And this is beyond the world of espionage. This requires ethics, religion, what have you, philosophy. And unfortunately, like with everything else that man has developed, every thing that helped us to progress, weapons, tools, there's a way to use them to your benefit, and there's a way to wreak destruction. Look at atomic energy. It could destroy the world, but it also could provide lots and lots of energy, which is needed. Same with AI. This is outside of the sandbox where I'm comfortable thinking. It just scares the heck out of me.
What I find very interesting, Jack, is that almost all intelligent people are scared of AI. because they understand how powerful it can be. Because humans, we are very logic. You can understand human behavior. We are always logic. But what happens when the AI trains itself to become so intelligent that it's no longer logic for normal people to understand? Then it's scary.
Yeah, there's another science fiction writer, and he wrote about 20 or so books, and there's a series of books where he has a war that's going on between the machines and the people, and there are machines that are like robots, and then there's this. It's called Omni, I think. This is the one machine that was concocted by people to make sure that Earth is like a great place to live in, like, your intelligent home now. But that thing decided that the people are messing up his nice planet. So you would think about this. These guys had some kind of vision that I'm afraid the next generation and the generation after we're going to have to deal with.
What do you think about big data and Facebook, Google, and so on that is collecting a lot of information from normal citizens?
Yeah, that's another scary thing. And I have grown to be very suspicious of large organization and power concentrated in one. Amongst a small minority of people, organizations. And by the way, we're not the first ones who have that, who are concerned with that. The Romans, when they initially conceived the way they would govern themselves, had this division of power. And it worked for a while. The American state was constructed in such a way to make sure that there is not power concentrated in one particular part of government. And so now what we got to information is power. And no matter how well-meaning that organization might be, I'm only thinking about, what an advanced country Germany was when Hitler took over. Large organization can always flip, and they might start out as good, but this power can be corrupted, and in the wrong hands, it could get to results that none of us would like. We could all be enslaved by a minority that knows everything about everybody.
And a company by itself is an own entity. And that's I don't think we think about companies that way. We think about company as a company, but it's a living entity, and a living entity will always do its best to survive.
Yeah, you're right, and that's I'm not paranoid. I have given up fighting the data collection. Because if you at one point. I've given up, and I'm using my cell phone to tell me where to go. I'm using my cell phone to tell me where there's a good restaurant. So, and that data is being collected. I don't even know how you can police this effectively, right? I just don't know. There's a lot of scary things going on, and I haven't heard anybody, when it comes to AI and big data, come up with something that even approaches a solution where you say, yeah, that might work. And this may sound odd to a lot of people and too pessimistic, but I am very close to giving up on man. I see too much bad stuff around me, and I don't know if we're good enough to deserve to live into the future. I don't know.
In what way, Jack? Sorry for interrupting. In what way do you see so much destruction and bad people?
In what way? fundamentally, I don't think there is a single really good person on this planet. And I give you the example of Mother Teresa, who is probably the epitome of goodness, who sacrificed herself, who at the end of her life started questioning herself. Did I do the right thing? We are not perfect, and there's all kinds of level of imperfections. And when you look at the people that run, oh my God, when you look at every day, there's a public, powerful figure in the news who mistreated women in the United States. And a lot of this is real. It's not just women. I've been mistreated as an employee. There's a lot of bad stuff out there, and that bad stuff, eventually, when it gets concentrated and married with too much power, is going to not come up with a good result. That is my fear here. When we were running around and we had nothing but clubs and rocks in our hands, we couldn't do that much damage. Now we got weapons that pretty much can blow up the earth.
But haven't mankind always been so? As you said, then we have clubs and rocks, but we have had atomic weapons for a lot of years now, and we haven't blown ours also.
Right, and somehow it's a miracle that none of them, besides Hiroshima and Nagasaki, have been exploded. But we come pretty close several times, and right now it looks like. We're not at that danger point, but we got some rogue states and the possibility of an organization stealing a couple of those bombs. The moment one of those things explodes and you don't know who exploded it, the U.S. then would most likely launch a proactive strike to Russia where the other half of the nukes are, or vice versa, and that's the end of the world. So that's the danger that I see today. Again, you talked about AI and big data. That's something else, and that ultimately scares me more.
What is the reason that scares you more, to be specific?
But because, as I said before, I don't see a good solution. There's always a possibility that you can destroy all the nukes, and that you can have supervision and controls to actually make sure that they don't exist anymore, that you voluntarily give up those weapons. I don't know how you supervise big data, as I said before, and runaway AI. I haven't heard anybody say something intelligent to say that this is how we could manage this.
I'm curious about the stuff. I know we are running out of time now, Jack. But when you work as an intelligence officer, as you have been doing, do you think you see the good in people, or do you think you look for the bad in people when you have that kind of a job and training as you have had?
Good question. When it comes to recruiting an effective asset, I think the best recruit would be somebody who is fundamentally good and honest, and you would leverage something that they strongly believe in. So I understand, for instance, the East German spies in West Germany had a lot of success telling their West German recruits that they are contributing to maintaining the peace in the world, to maintaining a balance. So these recruits cooperated not out of greed, not out of hatred, but out of the goodness of their own heart, and they would be the most trustworthy. The others can serve a purpose too, but they can turn around and betray you in just the way they betrayed their own country. I would always look for that kind of a candidate. And what you call this recruitment technique false flag. You don't tell them really who they're working for. You give them the illusion that they are doing something noble to help the world.
So you're looking for idealistic people.
Absolutely. And oh, by the way, the atomic secret, the theft of the atomic secret, would not have been possible without some scientists who thought it was too dangerous for the U.S. to have the monopoly on that weapon, and so they decided to level the playing field and let the secret out.
As my last question, what do you think about the Cold War these days? Do you think it ever ended, or do you think it have escalated?
Well, maybe it's a Cold War 2.0, but it's not the war between two systems of ideology and commercial type systems. Communism versus capitalism. That's gone. Capitalism, at least for the time being, has won. It made morph into something other than what we have today. For instance, I don't know if you have that, but the structural unemployment will become so bad because of automation that eventually the whole idea of a minimum wage, subsistence wage to be given to people who cannot work because they can't do the kind of jobs that are where you still need people.
I think Finland tried that. I think Finland tried that recently.
Yeah, that didn't work out so well, but something needs to be done, or else we're going to have an underclass that would become violent eventually. But anyway, that Cold War, the way it was situated in those days, doesn't exist anymore. The world is much more complex and therefore much more difficult to manage. From the United States point of view, without getting into internal politics, I think we need to stop being so messianic. America has, particularly since World War II, America was isolationist for most of its existence. But after World War II, we developed, when I say we, the United States developed a messianic attitude about saving the world from itself. That has backfired many times. It doesn't work. I don't know what else to say, but it's not a Cold War the way it used to be. And Russia is not the Soviet Union. Russia is not by far less powerful than the Soviet Union was. The economy of Russia is roughly the size of the economy of the state of Texas, right? And significantly smaller than the economy of California. China is significantly stronger than Russia. Now, one of the reasons that in the U.S. nowadays we talk about Russia all the time is it has to do with internal politics. One party decided that Russia all of a sudden is really bad, and it's the bad player, the worst player on the planet. I don't like Russia the way it is operating today. I have no love for Vladimir Putin, but on the other hand, there's a whole lot more evil in this world than what you find out of Russia, right? So it's not the same. It's not the bipolar world where it's we against the Russians or we against the Russians and the Chinese. It's complicated, and the complication is such that people have limited abilities to make good decisions. And you add politics there and the necessity to stay in power to make decisions, and it becomes an almost impossible task. You muddle through somehow and pray that things won't blow.
But doesn't that make the intelligence work even more hard? Because before you knew you had Russia and the communism, but now you don't know who your enemy is. Doesn't that work? Make it extremely
Let me tell you something that what I think is the biggest problem about intelligence work is that the people that you give the intelligence to will actually believe what you tell them. That happens a lot. Again, that's human nature. I give you one example from the East. My best friend, German friend, was a major in the Stasi. He did science. He forged documents and stuff like that. And when when Gorbachev came out with his perestroika and glasnost, he wrote a book about this. And the good vassal that East Germany was, they had to translate the book and print it. And at one point, you think those books made it to into the stores? No, they were piled up in the hallways of the Stasi. And my friend said, and that's 100% the truth, that East German, the Stasi collected tons and tons of intelligence that was really good information, and they brought it to the party leaders and they ignored it. They ignored it because it didn't fit their preconceived notion as to what was what. Happened to Americans, it happened to Stalin, and I've seen this over and over in corporate America, where the leaders become so enamored with themselves and live so much in their own world that they are reluctant to let information to the contrary into their heads. So that will not change. And the other part of the answer is, of course, if you have a whole lot more players and the world is much more complicated, you don't even know, you have limited means to deploy your agents. Who do you send where and what do you collect and what's important? You have to sort out a whole lot more information. And as you grow an intelligence organization, it becomes unmanageable, because the bigger an organization, the harder it is to sort of focus on one thing. And then you have these individual agendas, because every person always has a reason for being things. There's fundamentally nobody who can just sacrifice self for the good of everything else. It's very rare. So size, complexity makes everything harder, and that includes intelligence reporting. But the human weakness to believe the news that you don't like, to not believe it, that will not go away.
I promise this is my last question. What do you think is the solution if you see 10 years ahead?
Solution to what? I am trying to find a solution to, the proper upbringing to my 7-year-old, which is already complicated enough.
I have a 4-year-old, so I know.
I'm not qualified. I won't answer this question, because whatever I come up with, you play it back to me, I will say, "What the heck did I just tell this guy?" You give me a specific, isolated problem, I may have an opinion, but the world, that's beyond my ability to comprehend. I should not comment on it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, Jack. I thought this was a really interesting conversation. You're really good at connecting and explaining your situation and what you mean, and you're telling your story.
Well, you asked some interesting questions, and what happens to me a lot is I come to new conclusions while I'm talking, and today we had one or a couple more. So it's usually when you have somebody very intelligent and thoughtful to interact with, they bring something out of you that was hidden there someplace that you didn't get to by yourself. And as many times I have been interviewed, there's usually one or two things that says, "Oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that." And you really stretch my ability to express myself when it comes to this AI stuff and data and so forth. I do write essays and I blog, and I got a ton of them on my website, but I have twice as many on my computer that aren't finished, that aren't ready, and then I go over them again and I go over them again, and ultimately it's never finished.
You're a perfectionist.
Well, no, I'm not, but it's never finished because it's always wrong in some way, because I've found myself to have been wrong so many times. So why would it is illogical to now determine that now I'm at a stage where I'm right. I think I may be more right in many respects, and I'm clearly more right than some of the nonsense that I see on a daily basis. But to claim to be right is to claim to be God.
In some way, Jack, that means that if you are going to be right, you have to see into the future to see that what you're writing today. must be right.
That's right.
That's not possible.
and here's the one example that I always bring up is arguably, there is no real measurement, but at least one of the smartest people who ever lived on this planet, Albert Einstein, was mostly right, but he was wrong about quantum mechanics. And that was a Norwegian who won that one, Niels Bohr.
Okay, I didn't know that, Jack. You're very well read. That's for sure.
Niels Bohr, I think, is Norwegian.
Okay.
And he was not the inventor, but he sort of was the main discoverer of quantum mechanics. And Einstein argued this till his dying days, and he was so freaking wrong. And so, who am I to claim that I'm right? I hope that I'm mostly right, and I hope that I can help some people think things true. But it's the height of arrogance to claim to know everything.
Thank you so much for your time, Jack.
You're welcome.
Have a great day.
It was a pleasure. Take care.
Bye-bye.